And yes, so we do have with us today Simon Harmer from Thursday. Simon, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us, as I say. Simon is a very experienced individual, and as I say, founder of founder of Thursday, an award-winning multidisciplinary design studio based in Winchester. And he's given us such a compelling title to this webinar. And he's going to be telling us more about how to be insight-led, why your brand really matters right now, and some really good content creation tips. So, Simon, really pleased to have you with us today with all of your wealth of experience and knowledge, and sharing that with some of the Evolve members and other guests for this webinar. But before I hand over to Simon, which I'll do shortly, I just want to tell you a little bit more about Evolve. I know some of you are members of the Evolve community, a community you can join for free if you go to evolvemembers.com. Evolve provides inspiration, development opportunities, and insights to business owners, leaders, directors, entrepreneurs to enable them to achieve greater personal and business success. And we do that through a variety of different ways, including our peer groups, which are accountability with like-minded individuals, sharing your experiences, your good, your bad, and your mad every month, and just learning and developing with each other. The simple things like our Evolve to Succeed podcast. And Simon, you're going to be on a guest on the podcast in a week or so's time, aren't you?
Brilliant. Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to having you on as a guest. So if you haven't already, please do go to your device, do search for the Evolve to Succeed podcast. We provide coaching one-to-one and in groups and for organizations. And also, if you go to evolvemembers.com, you'll see that inspirational content and articles are updated weekly. And clearly, we run events in the real world when we can, but also events like today while we can't, in terms of online webinars. And if you are based in Poole and Bournemouth, we've got a lovely co-working hub in Ashley Cross and Poole in an old school building. But that is enough for me. You haven't come to hear about me. You haven't come to hear about Evolve. We've come to hear from Simon, as I say, with such a compelling title for his webinar and presentation. So without any further ado, Simon, I'll hand over to you. And I will come back at the end to host the Q&As with you. So as you're going through, everybody, if you've got any questions, then please do go to the Q&A facility, and please just list your questions as we go. And at the end of the presentation, I will pose those to Simon. Simon, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Warren. Yeah, big thank you to Warren and also to Amy, who's been in the background helping us to get this all going, and generally to Evolve. I've seen a lot of these groups, particularly locally, that have been a huge benefit to entrepreneurs and business owners, but I think Evolve does an incredible job. Some great content, events, and the co-working space as well. So a huge thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. Of what is my last speaking event of the year, so a real honour. Coming to you from our wonderful studio here in Winchester. There you go, look, that's Winchester outside. We haven't been able to spend too much time in this studio in the last year, but I'm here today, so that's great. So yeah, as Warren said, I'm going to run through this presentation today. It's probably be about 30 minutes long. Feel free to ask any questions when it comes to it, and we'll get cracking. So we're going to talk about why being insight-led is so important, the importance of your brand, and then how to create good content. But before we do that, I thought that I would get you guys involved today. So we're going to play a bit of a game, bullshit bingo. I'm sure you've all been in those meetings where you hear those phrases come out and you cringe a bit, particularly in my world of design and marketing. It happens an awful lot. So we're going to play that game today. So I'll give you the instructions in a minute, but basically what I want you to do is you can either scan that QR code with your phone, just use your camera and it will open up a URL. So you can do this on any device, but use your phone, or you just visit the URL bsbingo.uk, not co.uk, just .uk. So basically what's going to happen, as I go through the presentation, I'm going to mention 3 bullshit bingo phrases. So, you know, the classic things that you hear in meetings that make you cringe. And basically, if you hear one, you just swipe it off. So I'll just show you what that looks like. When you get to the bingo page, just put your name in. And if you put your name in, it will allow me to see at the end who the winner is. There will be a prize. And then as you hear me say something cringeworthy, you just swipe it off on your phone and swipe it off. And basically there's 3 phrases. Don't try and guess them because you'll get it wrong. And it's the first person to swipe all 3 off in order, must be in order, that will win. And money can't buy a prize. Well, money can buy it, but anyway, you'll see later. So bsbingo.uk, or scan that with your phone, and we'll get playing. It also means you have to listen to everything I say, and they'll be quite obvious. So I find it's a really good way to touch base. You can have that one for free, okay? So there you go. There's a perfect hand model showing you how to swipe them off. Okay, there we go. So a good game of bullshit bingo. Oops, sorry. I should just do, it was a nice intro, thank you, Warren, but just to give you a bit of background to me and to what I do, I'll give you a very quick show reel of Thursday. We're a design studio here in Winchester, and it's probably easier to show you what we do rather than for me to tell you. So here's our quick show reel, less than a minute. So there you go, that's us, that's Thursday. So we're a design studio here in Winchester, as I said. So we're an insight-led agency. We cover everything from brand to digital. We work for global clients like Estee Lauder and Samsung, but we also do some really great work for local businesses, charities and startups. So that's what we do. And I'm the founder. We've been running for, we'll be 13 years old in January. We went through a bit of a rebrand last year, changed our name. Used to be known as Marmalade on Toast, if any of you have ever heard of us. I'm also a published author and illustrator, so I trained as an illustrator at Portsmouth University, and I do still do some illustration in my spare time. I've had commissions from people like Mazda and Visit England. This is a piece of work I did for Tate Modern and Hugo Boss as well. I've got a great story about Hugo Boss. I'll tell you another time if Warren ever invites me back. I thought I'd share this with you as well. This is a really terrible photograph, but it made me laugh. I went into Tate Modern to see my poster that they commissioned me to do on the wall. And there it was amongst all these incredible artists. And there on the right-hand side next to it was a list of the artists. And look, there's me at number 10 above Salvador Dali, Francis Bacon, Liechtenstein, Rothko, Hockney. So I've kept that forever as a kind of, I'm above them. I'm not really, obviously. So there you go, you can see I'm really passionate about creativity, not just in the sense of how things look, but just how that adds value. I do a lot of talks about the value of design and how that can really help businesses. What I often get mixed up with, and what I'm afraid I'm not, is I'm not a marketing expert, which quite often surprises people. Hey, you're the marketing guy. So I suppose in that respect, I'm the design guy, but I do work with a lot of marketers and obviously I understand the industry really well. So we're going to talk about insight today, why you should be insight-led, the importance of brand, and how to create good content. So let's start with number 1, that golden rule of being insight-led, which we always are as an agency. And why is that? Well, there's a tendency, particularly in today's world, where everything's digital and instant, to be really reactive. And it's a really bad trait, I think. Now, I will just say that it is important sometimes to look at what's going on around you and react in a certain way, but you've got to use insight to inform that reaction. And I just saw this over the weekend and dropped it in. This is an example of when it doesn't work. You may have seen this, that British Airways tweeted, "Good luck to the England team against Wales today." And as Leighton Andrews, whoever he is, said, WTF, because it's not English Airways. So it's these little knee-jerk reactions that sometimes people push out there that can actually be quite detrimental to your brand. So what do we mean by insight? Well, let's have a look at the definition. It's the capacity to gain an accurate and deep understanding of someone or something. So important point there about audience. We quite often refer to IDEO, that somebody may have heard of, but they're a design thinking agency in America. They've been championing design thinking for years now. In fact, I did one of their courses over the summer. This is from one of their partners, Jane Fulton Surrey. She's got this lovely quote, and she says, "Undertake a focused discipline of curiosity. Let go of assumptions and deliberately observe." And I think that's really lovely. There's a few things in there. Always be curious. Always ask why. It's one of the first things we do with our clients, particularly when we get a brief. Quite often people come to us and say, "Oh, I need this." And if you kind of unpick that, you may have heard the technique of asking 5 times, ask why 5 times, and it will help you get to the bottom of something. It's something kids are brilliant at. Let go of assumptions. Don't just assume you know. Again, I have a lot of clients that come to me and they say things like, "Hey, we want to do this, and we want to do that, and we want to do that." And I'll ask why, and they'll say, "Because I like it, because I think it's right." And there's a lot of assumptions in there, but you've got to observe. Let go of those assumptions, be curious. How can you do that? Well, there's loads of ways you can do, particularly digitally. At the start of lockdown, it's been a difficult year. One of the first things we did is we sent a survey out to all of our clients. 1 question: what do you want from us right now? 3 simple answers: leave me alone, I need help, or just stay in touch. So something as simple as that, but staying in touch with your customers is a really good way of doing it. There are loads of good tools online. We use SurveyMonkey. We also use Typeform. User testing. Those of you involved with websites will understand this theory, but you can also get people around a table. Not so much of that going on at the moment, but speak to people, get them to use your product, test your website. Social media, of course, I'm sure you've all got social media channels of some sort. Just keep an eye on them, monitor them, see what people are saying. Web chat, another great tool that a lot of business owners use. And finally, Google Analytics, which we spend a lot of our time with our heads in here, particularly our digital team. Loads of great tools out there that allow you to do this. And of course, the other thing you can do is pick up the phone, speak to people. Again, it was something we did at the start of lockdown, just picking up the phone and talking to people. Big office fans here at Thursday. One of the other things we really like to do, UK office, is collaborate with people, just like David Brent would. And one of the things we do, I said earlier, is being insight-led. And quite often we'll get clients that come to us that need really deep dive insight, so real deep customer research, and that's where we'll partner up with somebody. There's a brilliant agency in Winchester called Walnut, who are a market research neuroscience company. And whilst we can do some desk research and some digital research, these guys go really deep. I'll give you a quick example. We had a client came to us, love this cheesy photograph, an American investment company who were looking to build some retirement villages in the UK, and they'd highlighted some key areas in the south that they really wanted to know what the consumer thought. So we partnered up with Walnut and we created these really detailed discussion guides. We put visual cues in. And what Walnut did is they went out and they recruited families that were looking to downsize, people kind of 55 upwards, and they went to their homes and they spoke to them. And they asked them these really quite emotional questions about when they were looking to downsize, what their families would do. And they even involved some of the children as well in these conversations, and used these visual guides to see what it was that they really wanted. How big were the properties? What did they look like? What were the outside spaces like? Really key, pertinent information like this, but also, you know, the functional things like leases and prices. And then they came back with this really detailed document, which they presented back to us and the client. And it came back with some really, really interesting stuff, things that we should avoid, including things like languages. Don't use things like assisted living, aged living, but they were okay with things like luxury retirement, and luxury was a word that we were trying to avoid, but it was something they reacted well to. So a really brilliant detailed document, which then helped us to create a new brand for them. which looked a bit like this. We called it Trellis, which was all about support and growth. Each individual site had its own unique identity because each one would be different in a different location. So we had this kind of adaptive identity that would work. And then we wanted it to be different, and it was all about people, so softer color palette. If you think about somebody like McCarthy and Stone, or some of the more slightly more corporate ones like Pegasus, that had this very high-end prestige feel, we went for this softer look and feel, and this is just some of the creative work that came out of it. And this was all informed by insight from a research company. So really good to get that partnership going as well. I will just say a word of caution here when you're looking at insight, particularly data. I know what you're all thinking now. Why on earth is he showing this very silly gif of people bouncing around? But it just made me laugh. I did a search for bounce. And the reason for that is quite often people just look at small pieces of data in isolation. And Google Analytics is classic for this. You'll have heard this expression about bounce rates, which is effectively when people visit your website and then leave straight away. And sometimes people will look at this in isolation. They'll look at a piece of quantitative data. And by that, I mean something that's data and kind of numbers driven, if you like, and they'll make an assumption about it. Now, I think, the average bounce rate across the UK is something like 40 to 60%. Real estate, as Google calls it, for example, has the best, if you like, which is the lowest, which is around 45. And something like food and drink is quite high, like 65. But if you just look at that one piece of information in isolation, without then going and talking to those clients, you won't find out the real meaning behind it. So there might be that people are coming to that website and finding exactly what they need. That's enough, and then they go. So it's just digging into that and using qualitative and quantitative data. Okay, so now we've got our insight. Brilliant. Rule number 2, the power of your brand. And what do I mean by this? Well, I've got a whole other talk on brand, which we can do another time if you like. A relevant slide. I'm sure you all watched the Bake Off recently. Anyway, I love this picture, partly because just look at their faces, but also it reminds me of a story. And my old business partner, who was a bit of a David Brent character, I have to say, but he had this old analogy about cakes. And he would always say a cake is like a brand. And I sort of know what he means by that, because when I was back at school, this is going to age me now, but when I was doing my GCSE home economics class, I think the kids of today call it food tech, we had to do an end of year presentation. We had to make something, had to present it beautifully, and the person that shared the desk with you or the cooking space had to then test the food and mark it for you. So the girl next to me, lovely girl, Sam Bernardini, was a good friend of mine. She had this great idea. She was going to cook a cake, just like the one that Paul Hollywood's holding there. And she drew it out. She had these beautiful decorations, covered it in chocolate and hundreds of thousands of fruit, and it looked incredible. And it got to the end of the day, and I cut into the cake, perfectly baked, and I bit into it, and I spat it all over the floor. Because what she'd done is she's focused so much on what it looked like, she'd actually got her ingredients wrong and put salt in instead of sugar, and it tasted disgusting. And the point here is that a brand is a bit like this. A lot of people think a brand is visual. It's what you see, and if it looks great, that's great. But actually, just like a cake, you need to think about everything, every single ingredient. A brand really is an emotional connection to your audience. And so if you're making a cake, you just consider who you'd make it for. If you're making it for, somebody who's having a 70th birthday, what do they like? What ingredients do they need? How does it need to make them feel? And then at the end, how does it look as well? You've got to consider all of those things. And that's what a brand is all about. And there's loads of studies worldwide about how important brands are, but also how important design is. And obviously a design is a big part of brand. There's a company in America called the DMI, the Design Management Institute, an amazing company who run this study over 10 years called the Design Value Index. And they reported the S&P 500, and they monitored it against design-centric companies and found that those companies outperformed the S&P, which is basically the FTSE 100 or the FTSE 500 in America, by 211%, which is phenomenal. And in this country, you might have heard of the Design Council. They're a fantastic body, great resource for anything to do with design. They will tell you that for every £1 a business invests in design, it can return over £20 in revenue. So if you imagine that for a moment, that's spending £100 on design would return your business 2 million in revenue. So if anybody's got £100 budget they want to spend, come and see me, and I'll make sure we'll get you 2 million in revenue. Kantar, who are a global consultancy firm, they have this consultancy document called The Best of Brands 2019. They will tell you that that top brand ranking, number 100, has a value of $13.4 billion. Extraordinary numbers. They also do this purpose-led brand analysis, and they'll tell you that brands with purpose, that's those that are seen to be doing good, will grow 212% in value, almost exactly the same as the DVI, actually. And there you can see that those that are perceived to have a positive impact will grow twice the rate of others. And there's an example of some of them there, but some big brands, but really, really important data that all of this stuff is backed up. So we know that it adds value. The question is, how do you get it? Well, creativity is a wonderful thing and I love it, but it needs process behind it to make it valuable. And design is a process. I'll just quickly run you through our brand process here. You can see that's all of the insight work we do. We then move into a big brand positioning phase, which is all about, if you look at that, exploration, but then it's digging into, if you've seen the Simon Sinek video about the golden circle, what your why is, what your brand essence is, that's where the real value comes from. That's where that emotional resonance is. And once you've got all of that, then you move into the fun bit, the creative stuff. And that could be anything from a new name to your visual, but also your verbal identity. It's really important to have that tone of voice that matches your visual identity as well. And off the back of that, we also do the ongoing outputs, things like content, brand guidelines, things like that. So have that process, whoever you work with, an internal company or outside agency, just trust that process. It's so important. And the real value is just down there in this brand essence. A why, a how, a what, and then your values, what you stand for, and your personality. So a good way to remember that is, if you think about something like mental health, for example, you've got somebody like Prince William, you've got Stephen Fry, you've got Russell Brand. They're all really interested and talk about mental health. That's their value, but they'll talk about it in a very different way. They've got different personalities, and that's what can really make you unique with a brand. Here's a great example of a brand that's done that. Airbnb, founded actually by two designers, which is why they're so successful, is they have this really design centric. They design all their experiences for their users, for their audience, and they design it for one, and then they expand it out. And they've got this really resonant why, which is all about making their audience feel like they belong anywhere. So you can go and stay in America and feel like you belong, part of that community, which is why the company's now valued, probably dropped in value this year, but over $30 billion in valuation. That's where we want to get to. That's a bit of blue sky thinking. Okay, so with your brand, remember, create that powerful why, that brand essence. Be consistent with it, always be consistent. Once you've got that, make sure you can always check back in on it, what that why is, and make sure all of your content is consistent with that. Be unique, be different to what everyone else is doing, and be true. Another good example, think about somebody like Virgin. Richard Branson's a fantastic figurehead, and he's all about people. When people work toward a common goal, they are driven and passionate and purposeful. And he always talks about his employees. Clients don't come first, employees come first. The thinking there is the employees will look after the clients. But if you remember back down at the start of lockdown, hugely negative press coming out about the fact that Virgin was asking all of its staff to take 8 weeks unpaid. And you've suddenly got this sort of contrast of, we're all about looking after people, and then suddenly we're all about putting people on furlough and asking them to take leave. So it's just making sure you're true to your brand, and a bit more on Virgin later. Okay, so we've got our insight, we've got our brand. How do we create good content? Oh, another great film reference here, one of my favorites. Now, there's a lot of noise out there, particularly at the moment, and by noise, I mean content. And this is just an example here from my Instagram feed. I was quite scared when I did this, just in case of what it was going to bring up. But these are the first 8 adverts that appeared. I think I was looking for some clothes for my daughter, honestly. Infographic, I suppose, you know, that's relevant to me. I work in the design industry. The MQL, I don't know what an MQL is. Is marketing most qualified lead, maybe? Men's clothes, a bit more on point. Poker, been playing a lot of online poker with my friends. Understand why that's come up. TikTok. I won't share any TikToks that we've done at home. More online courses. And there's our good friend Mark Ritson, another marketing course. So I think this was because I was searching for courses on IDEO. So you can just see from looking at that snapshot, I would have scrolled through that and seen those adverts in the space of probably 5 minutes. And that is a lot to get bombarded with. And remember, this is remarketed. So people have seen what I've looked at and posted this content to me, assuming that it's relevant. So that the idea is, how do we get cut through with all of this noise? You see some of the big brands putting content out over lockdown that's trying to be COVID specific. And, you know, I've seen positive and negative press towards these things. Some people saying, you know, it doesn't sit right with me, and other people saying, this is great, it's good marketing. Then you see people, again, going back to those purpose-led brands. These are people that I think are just doing some fantastic stuff. If you look at people like Louis Vuitton or Barbour actually creating PPE for the NHS, and then brands like Brewdog and LVMH who are creating sanitizer gel. So really actually helping. And then the much maligned Crocs, one of those Marmite brands, but they're doing this, they were doing this thing whereby if you bought a pair of Crocs, they would send a pair to healthcare workers on the front line. So these are companies that are doing things and then creating content off the back of that has real meaning and purpose, where I think it gets real value. Here we are, back to our friend Virgin. So Richard Branson, actually after the kickback he got from that press, released an open letter to his employees talking about how important they were to him. And they were also doing some amazing stuff. So it's worth saying, you know, they came back into where their brand position really was, about giving and about helping charities. So we've spoken to our customers. We've got this research. We've done the insight. You've got a strong brand position. That's all in place. You've got some beautiful brand identity work. Now you can start talking, right? Well, I would say no. Again, don't react. Let's start planning. Let's use a bit of strategy first and foremost. What do I mean by this? Well, it could be something as simple as a content plan. This is an example of a content plan we did for, it was a hotel client actually in South Kensington. And basically it's just planning out how you're going to do that content, just to give you that more structure and more strategy. You can see at the bottom here, audience, personas, the various topics we're going to talk about, content pillars. Again, this comes from your brand work, as does your tone of voice, the features and benefits, what your audience is going to get out of this, and then a roadmap of how you're going to do it, and then some reference documents as well in terms of keywords and things like that. So just plan it out. Don't just go out there and start chucking content. And remember, create beautiful content that people are going to remember, that looks great and that's on brand. The right tone of voice to the right audience. Keep it simple. It's one of the key things we always talk about. Succinct and to the point, especially at the moment when there is so much content out there. And measure it. Such an important thing to do. This is how you know that it's been successful when you're creating content. And again, there's just a snapshot of what one of our measurement plans looked like. Everything from objectives, what you're trying to achieve, your goals, your KPIs, and then how you're going to measure it. And it, you know, it could be as simple as written on the back of a piece of paper, but just keep track of, you know, how much content you're putting out there, how successful it is, and you can refer back to it, tweak it, iterate it, and make it better. So I just put a couple of examples in here of what I think is great content. This was something that was released at the start of lockdown. Those of you with Disney Plus will remember Frozen 2 coming out and was streamed directly on Disney Plus. Now look, we're talking about a brand here that has fantastic equity. They're all about magic. But look, a beautiful piece of content, really simple, 20,000 likes and some just great feedback. You know, lots of people saying, I'm quarantined, thank you for this. Another great brand, I think, you might not recognize this, but I think this is a beautiful piece of well thought out content. And I'll just play this as a short video. Have a look at this. So Skyscanner, which have done a brilliant job of repositioning themselves in the last couple of years, I think, gone from basically a search engine for flights into this really interesting brand that's all about sustainability and global travel. This is another piece of content that they released, which I think is quite fun. It's one of those things where it doesn't matter what number you put in, it's always going to come out at 9. And obviously at that point, it's about staying at home. But this content it's relevant, it's not knee-jerk, it's beautifully created, and it's emotive. And if you look at Skyscanner, this is how they used to look, a very functional brand, all about, how you can find things. And then they repositioned themselves as this global transformation to modern and sustainable travel. And you can see they softened up the brand, did a whole repositioning, and I think it's some beautiful stuff there now. And again, a $1 billion valuation company now, so clearly doing things right. And quite often when I show examples like this, people say to me, but it's great for them. They've got these massive budgets that they can spend on marketing. What about the smaller companies? And I'll take you back to Walnut, just as an example, because we've worked with them. We actually repositioned Walnut. We did their brand creative for them. When they first came to us, they had a slightly out of kilter brand, and they're part of an agency group actually, but they wanted someone outside that group to look at them. And they were all about being a human understanding agency. A lot of their competitors were about very clinical, very kind of corporate looking, lots of blues and cold colors, and they wanted to be about people, and they called themselves the Human Understanding Agency. This is the new identity that we created for them. It was all about bringing focus and these kind of natural, softer, more human palettes. And again, people throughout the photography. So we helped them create this really beautiful looking identity, again, consistency through everything. And they had that in place, they had their brand position in place, they had the imagery in place, and they were able to create this really consistent, beautiful, succinct content through all of their channels. So it's not just the big boys that can do it. SMEs, startups, everybody has the ability to do this stuff. You don't need massive budgets, you just need to do things in the right way. So I've rattled through that. I appreciate it. Hopefully that's all clear, but I'll just quickly go back through it. Remember, use insight. Talk to your clients, talk to your customers, look at what the industry is doing, look at your competitors. Don't make assumptions. Quite often say to our clients, you are not the audience. The amount of times I've had business owners saying, hey, I love this color, you're not the audience. Remember to mix up that qualitative and quantitative research. Don't forget your brand. Now's a great time to revisit your brand. Get that strong brand in place. It will add value to your business. Trust the process that your creative team does, your agency, and be consistent with it and be true. Remember to just check back in on what that brand position is. And then creating good content. Have a strategy behind it, plan out what you're going to release and when. Trust that brand position, use that as a kind of sounding board, be succinct and use good design. Make sure it looks great. Remember to measure it. You can go back then, do the things that have great impact. So there you go. I hope you'll agree that's really outside the box. Now then, I've talked a lot about design, I've talked a lot about illustration, but I will leave you with my greatest ever achievement.
Thank you. 4. Listening.
Thank you very much. You can, oh, this is how I'm imagining people are at home now. Yeah, finally work. Before I go over to Q&A, Warren, I'll just try and look at who the winner is. So we should have a winner by now. And the winner is Rachel. So we'll have to find out who Rachel is. But well done, Rachel. And your amazing Money Can't Buy, Money Can Buy prize is a copy of my book, which I'll sign a copy for you, Rachel. And I'll send that to you. So if you get in touch with us and give us your address, I'll make sure you get a copy of that. But thank you, everybody, for playing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. That was good fun. And yeah, just it's clear from that short presentation from you, Simon, why Thursday is such a renowned design studio, so successful and award-winning. I loved lots of the content that you were kind of putting a content out there. I love the idea of simplicity. I think sometimes when we think about, brands, when we think about evolve or inspire, we sometimes we've overcomplicated things in the past, and sometimes you just need to bring it back to some simplicity. I love that idea also of thinking about all of the ingredients in a brand. Sometimes we think about it as being that superficial, but where's the depth and all of those? So that resonated with me. I've also learned along the years that I'm not the audience. So what?
Yeah, that's a great one.
So that right at the end kind of just went, yeah, okay, I've got that. And creating emotive content as well. I think, particularly as you said, when there's so much noise out there, creating content that is emotive, that's going to get engagement, is so important. So
yeah, it's interesting actually, Warren. We've noticed something really interesting in recent times. So obviously, I'm sure all of the listeners do. We use LinkedIn as a platform quite a lot because it's a business platform, very B2B. And we've noticed something when we're posting content, that their algorithm picks up on the really emotive messages in your posts. So we'll find that we might post some work, for example, we'll do a case study of work and people are like, yeah, that looks nice, but it's the things like, oh, it's a stupid thing. The other week, I jumped on a bike, there's a bicycle in the back there, and I got my phone out and I recorded myself cycling around the studio because there was nobody here and nearly crashing into the cupboards. And then in the post I wrote, it's great to be here, I'm missing people, and they're picking up on this emotive content, this stuff that resonates with people, and you can just see the engagement going up and up and up. So just simple things like that will really help.
Yeah, no, definitely. Great tips, definitely. So
I'm not sure everybody can cycle around their workplace on a bike.
Yeah. Well, I'm a keen cyclist, but I've fallen off twice this year and broken my collarbone. Oh, no. So I may not try that one, Simon, but Amy, Ursula, Oliver, feel free to bring your bikes in and give it a go. So we do have a question, Simon, from Sarah. What are your thoughts on translation? Would you use Google Translate or a languages specialist?
Again, I would go back to that first point about insight and audience. If Google Translate is great for kind of instant translations, but in my experience, it doesn't pick up on the nuance. If you're talking to an audience, you need to talk in their language, and by that I mean not just their native language that they speak, but just the little nuances and ways that they might talk. So if I'm talking to a very B2B or corporate audience, I'll tailor my language specifically. If I'm talking to entrepreneurs and business owners, it will be slightly different. And Google Translate won't know that. So if you've got some really succinct, detailed content rather, that's specific about something and it's quite detailed, I would get a native speaker to translate that for you. If it's just the odd word here and there, because you need to cover the bases, you think the audience might include people from foreign languages, then I think it's fine.
Brilliant. Okay, Rachel says she's that was brilliant and looking forward to a copy of her book. So
brilliant. I'll try and get it to you before Christmas.
Brilliant. I've got a question for you, and if there is any more questions from the audience, please do post them. I've got a question for you. How do you, there's a lot of terminologies out there, for professional services, solicitors, for what we do, peer groups, and those terms are used commonly. I mean, and perhaps you want to distinguish yourself, even as a design agency, you want to stand out, but your term nearly defines you. I mean, how do you go about, even redefining the term, or actually, would you use a different term to stand out, or do you use that term and actually, I suppose, use the creativity and empathy and emotion to stand out?
It's a great question. Terminology is one of those things that quite often drives me mad, particularly when I'm talking to marketers. There's about 100 acronyms in our industry, and CRM, B2B, SEO, PP, all of these terms, and quite often our clients, one of the things we found is that they'll look at us when we say things and like, I don't know what you're talking about. So we try and keep it as succinct as possible and cut through the bullshit. Don't use overly complicated terminology. Now, there's no doubt that in certain industries, people use certain terms for certain things. And so you have to use those quite often. Now, there's an opportunity sometimes, and this is where the brave brands come in, to say, well, we're going to redefine that. So can we redefine what a design agency is? You know, can we talk about things in a slightly different way? Now that's a harder job to do because you're kind of re-educating people, but it's a very brave thing to do. And once you've done that, you are then operating in an area where there isn't anyone else. So it's a really interesting piece of positioning. So I guess the opportunity is there for people. I think sometimes you have to use, if you want to talk to that audience and that's the language they understand, then you have to use it. But if you can change that slightly and bring them on the journey with you, then you're in a really interesting place.
Brilliant, great advice, Simon. Thank you. Got a question here. If you have low or sort of zero budget and you're just starting your sort of business, the website, and don't have any customers yet, so you're really on that startup journey, Simon, what are the best ways to get insight?
Ooh, good question. Well, you can do a lot of research yourself. You'll know what area you're going into. A great place to look is competitors. So look at people that are doing what you're doing. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to talk to them. So one of the things I think that's been brilliant in my industry in the last few years, but particularly this year, is you will see a lot of camaraderie amongst agencies starting to help each other. And what can happen is, Winchester's a really rich area for creatives, for example. We're close to London. There's a lot of people that have worked at big agencies and then come back and set things up locally. But what you'll find is that all of these businesses are doing things slightly differently. So there's a great agency here called Studio Republic who do a lot of work for not-for-profit charities. And whenever we get a charity project in, we'll push it their way. Similarly, they don't do a lot of branding work. So if they get a brand comes in, they'll push it our way. So talk to your competitors, look at them, see what they're doing, but start to build these partnerships with them like we do with Walnut. You know, you'll get this really lovely reciprocal where they start passing clients amongst yourself. So that's a really good way to do it. Do things like this, talk to other people in the industry, just absorb as much as you can from a sponge point of view. Google will tell you a lot. But yeah, I think quite often speaking to people and seeing what other people do is a really interesting way to go.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that point around, particularly through 2020, and you mentioned yourself, that collaboration, isn't it? Is actually talking to others, yeah. Sharing experiences, gives you some of that insight, doesn't it? And I think people are more willing to share, even though we're all busy and hectic. I think that perhaps it could just come back into our kind of psyche to help others a little bit more. Hopefully, that will. It's
a wonderful thing to do. You've got to remember to reciprocate. That's the key thing. You know, just look to help people wherever you can. It always comes back to help.
Yeah, definitely. Somebody I know often says, and it's probably from a famous book, but I credit this individual, local guy in Bournemouth, and he says always put a hand up, you know, to get help from others, but always at the same time have your hand down, reaching out to help those that are coming up.
Yeah,
and it's a great.
I heard someone say in a podcast, always send the lift back down.
Yeah, I like that. Brilliant.
So we'll add that to the bullshit bingo app.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we can get it catching on, it'll be enough, won't it? We'll be reaching out and all of those kind of things. I avoided saying that, actually. I was very conscious of your bullshit bingo with my not saying reaching out just now, and I sort of talking about collaboration, Simon. So,
it's so hard, isn't it? It's so hard.
So for small businesses and startups that do have relatively small budgets, this is a question from Rachel, your winner, actually. If you were to focus on one thing to do well, what would you recommend?
I would say brand. Everything comes from your brand. And quite often people say, oh, I don't have a brand. You've already got a brand if you're talking to people because you're talking to them in a certain way, even the way you pick up the phone and speak to people. And you can do some of this yourself. You can figure it out. Just try and figure out what that why is, what your emotional heartbeat is, what it is that gets you up in the morning. Listen to, if you haven't seen it, go and have a look at the Simon Sinek TED Talk. It's called, it's not called the Golden Circle, but the theory is the Golden Circle. And he's written a book which is called Start with a Why, I think it's called. And it's just this idea that he talks about it in the talk, but most companies know what they do and they know how they do it. You know, we're a design agency, we create brands for people, but it's understanding what that why is, that real emotional resonance that will react to people. And it will not catch on with everybody, but you only need it to catch on to the people that you need it to. So just try and figure out what your brand position is and get that fixed and right, because once that's right, it's the foundation for everything else. You know what content will go out to that. It helps with things like hiring people. Is that person a Thursday person? Oh, well, they fit that because these are our values and our personality. The types of content that you put out, how you look, the office space, things like that. So it helps with everything. So that's the foundation.
Brilliant. That's great, Simon. That does bring to an end the questions that we have got. So from the audience, so can I just thank you once again? I mean, if we were there, we could have a round of applause, Simon, for just some great thoughts, insights, content, ideas. Definitely, as I say, got me thinking, Simon, about some of the things we do both at Evolve and Inspire.
Great stuff.
Thank you for your time. Great presentation. We will definitely have you back. So we'll get in touch and we will have you back. And if you're listening to the webinar, watch out for the Evolve to Succeed podcast with Simon. It's coming soon. And my last piece would be to say, look, please do go to www.evolvemembers.com. You can there register to support it. It's free. By doing that, you're going to get our weekly insights, details of the articles that we're writing, details of the articles that other contributors have given us to give you that kind of inspiration and that insight to develop both as an individual from a business and personal perspective. So without any further ado, thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy diaries to share some time with us. Hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren.